Hi, I'm Macy from the Charleston County Public Library, and thanks for watching this virtual program. September is Library Card Sign-Up Month, and your Charleston County Library card is the key to a wealth of information and resources for free. Of course, we have tons of books. We also have movies, telescopes, museum passes, and gaming tablets for kids. And your library card gives you access to tons of digital content, like ebooks, audiobooks, music, and magazine subscriptions, plus access to databases for professional development, learning a new language, and genealogy research. Your library card is available for free if you live in Charleston County. Just stop by your neighborhood branch with your proof of address and your ID. For more information, visit ccpl.org.
Hi, I'm McElroy Ansa.
And I'm Wanda Lloyd.
Wanda and I are twins in some way. We've known each other for more than half a century. Mm-hmm. We met each other in our freshman dorm room at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, in '67. And although we were very different.
1967, for all the young folks who don't know when '67 was.
Thank you, Wanda. Yeah, 1967, what they call back in the day.
Yeah.
So, yes. So we met each other, but we were very much alike in many ways. We were both English majors. We came from mid-sized Georgia towns. Wanda is from Savannah. I'm from Macon, Georgia. We came from the same kind of family background, but they did not take into consideration that people are different. And so Wanda and I were very different in temperament. She wanted the window open at night. I wanted the window closed. She made her bed every day. I said, "Why make your bed every day? You're just going to get back in it." But Wanda's friendship and mine has lasted and matured and enriched both our lives.
And let me say that I came to Spelman knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a journalist. I knew this from the 11th grade. And Tina knew she wanted to write something.
I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to write.
She wasn't quite sure what she wanted to write. She figured it out, but it took her a minute to figure it out with a little help from her friend Wanda.
With the help of my friend Wanda. I was telling, Wanda and I split up as roommates, but we certainly stayed together as friends. And we were both English majors, and we were, it's a small college at the time. Spelman was a fairly small population, and you knew everybody there. So you really were close to, I think, your classmates. You had an opportunity to. And so we went on for a while, and I was still wanting to write. And Wanda was, of course, the editor of the school newspaper, because Wanda came there knowing what she wanted to do. And so one day Wanda came storming into when I say storming, that's how Wanda comes in. Wanda walks with purpose. Right?
Not so much anymore, though. Not, at this age. I walk, but not with as much.
We're grateful to be walking at this age.
Yeah,
but she walked in and said, "You know what, Tina? You say you want to be a writer, and you are even on the school newspaper." So she shamed me into journalism. And it was just years and years later I realized, oh, Wanda's the one who made me a journalist. She's the one that set me on that course. So we've been friends all through book tours and, jobs, and Wanda being the editor, the head of two newspapers. Actually, when Wanda came to Spelman, remember, you didn't tell me you wanted to edit a newspaper and be a journalist. You told me that you wanted to edit a mid-sized Southern towns newspaper. And I remember thinking, how can she be so specific? And I want to write, that's where I was. But Wanda was very specific about what she did, and she did it all the way through, our 50 years. Just as I was writing novels, she was heading newspapers and writing articles and editing people's newspapers and running the newspaper as a business. So Wanda is my can-do friend.
So I was your first editor, because I was your editor in college. Your first newspaper editor.
You sure were. And I remember you sending back a story. You were told me, no, you're on the right track. But this is what you need.
So eventually the roles reversed, because you wrote books. I was editing newspapers. I edited at 7 daily newspapers in this country. And then when I was about to retire, I started working on my memoir. So then Tina became my mentor and my editor and my coach for my memoir, which is Coming Full Circle from Jim Crow to Journalism.
It was a wonderful experience, Wanda, wasn't it? It really was. I mean, we have been so many things to each other, as you can imagine. There's the book.
Here's the book.
Yeah, I know that. Hey, I taught her that. But we've had lots of roles over the years and done so many things, and it's so interesting that your book is coming full circle, because indeed that's what you've done. You're back in Savannah, where you indeed wrote your book. You were there as a professor and as the head of the mass communications department at Savannah State University, where she retired. She's retired like 7 times. I think she retires and they pull her back in. Every time she gets out, we pull her back in. But Wanda's been thinking a long time about her memoir. And we've been talking about it off and on over the years, because Wanda had
probably 3 years before I even started writing. We were talking about it.
Wanda, we talked about it when I visited you in Montgomery.
Yeah, I remember a little bit of that, but I really remember the conversation when I was about to retire. I was executive editor at the Montgomery Advertiser, and I either called Tina or she called me, and we started talking about, well, how do I write a memoir? Where do I get started? And I really had planned to retire from the newspaper and start writing immediately. And then the opportunity came to move back to Savannah and run the program at Savannah State University. And then I put it on hold for 3 years, and then eventually we got around to really working on it in earnest. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, because a lot of people wonder about the process of writing, and Tina was really helpful in helping me with the process of writing. We had meetings probably every couple of weeks. We would just sit down for a couple of hours on the phone, because I live in Savannah, you live in St. Simon's Island, and you don't
about 80 miles or 85 miles away.
Yeah, so we don't really see each other that much. And Tina was telling me all the things that I needed to do to have a smooth process in writing. And did I listen at first? No.
No, of course not. Well, what happened is, the process is just, I teach as well as write, and I teach reading, I teach writing. And one of the things that I have discovered over 50 years is process is at the core of everything that you do. And once you find your process is very specific. Once you find your process, meaning, when do I work best? When did I do my best material? Do I work in the day or do I work at night? Do I need silence? Do I need music? You have to ask yourself all these questions, and all these questions tell you what your process is. Yeah. And once you learn your process, so this is the most important part, respect your process. Mm-hmm. Don't get away from it thinking, I can do it a different way. Or, if you work best when it's quiet, and all of a sudden the environment has become loud because of children or noise outside or whatever, you've got to address that. You can't just, if it's earplugs, if it's something, but if your process is being quiet, you've got to respect your process while you're doing it. So Wanda, of course, had her process. She's edited newspapers, written articles, co-edited a book. And so she certainly was a writer, and she knew where she was going. But the first 2 chapters, I think you sent me?
The first 2 chapters. And Tina gave me all these things that I should do. She said, well, maybe you want to think about making an outline. Did I do that at first? No. She said, maybe you want to think about where you write, get a nice quiet place. No, I'm writing out in the open in the sunroom where people are going through, family and other people visiting the house. Maybe you ought to think about writing at daytime only or nighttime only, or set aside 2 hours a day. No, I just, catch as catch can. Maybe you ought to think about just putting everything else aside and just write. No, I continue to do, volunteer work with organizations, helping people, coaching young journalists on the phone, and just all that other stuff. So I put these 2 chapters together and I sent it to Tina, and she said, well, you have some good information here, but you write like a journalist, and I want you to stop it. You need to learn how to write like a nonfiction writer. And that's what I had to do. I had to stop and think about, not just hear her say it again, but I had to think about what it really meant. And that took
really what it meant, yes, to stop. Journalism is who, what, where, when, why, and I always think of it as a, sort of an open hand, and that's where you want to be, with your hand open. But writing nonfiction, writing an essay, writing a nonfiction book, a biography, is kind of like this, it's like between, this is journalism, and the handout is, for me, is writing. Well, fiction. Well, somewhere between here and here is nonfiction. It's sort of, because you need that where, why, when, and all of that, but you also need to write thoughtfully and, go deep and remember things and allow yourself to remember, allow yourself to hurt, allow yourself to write about a hurtful situation, an awful situation. Those are the things, and to me, those are the joys of writing. Fiction and nonfiction, as opposed to journalism, because journalism needs to be tight. But with a memoir like yours, I like to think of it as going on a journey. It's kind of like that. It's not like tight, and but it's a journey. And Wanda knew where she was going. She was self-assured. She writes beautifully, and she just needed to stop and say, oh, okay, I can kind of relax in this. I don't have a deadline today at the end at 6 o'clock. Right. I can write. And boy, that's all she needed. I mean, it's wonderful, when you give, it's like, nursing a little bird and letting them go, oh, they're flying. That's kind of how I felt, because she went back and she just nailed it. All she needed to do was say, oh, okay, I need to think, let me slow down. The things that you just said that you did. And, it started, you started sending me, chapters. And after a while, I stopped reading. I said, hey, girl, you're
You
good.
did stop reading. And I was wondering why you stopped reading. You did. You stopped reading. Well, you stopped giving me feedback on what you were reading. And then I stopped sending you stuff. And every now and then I would call and say, okay, can you read just this little bit of snippet here? Or can you give me some advice on how to sort of put this together? But I just...
Should this go here or should this go here?
Yeah.
That's what you need your editor for, because it belongs in there somewhere. You just need an outside view. My sister always says you can't see.
Tina, the biggest light bulb for me was when you convinced me, after I started writing without an outline, that I really needed an outline. I really needed some direction, because working in journalism, it's very structured. It's the inverted pyramid. You put all the important stuff at the top, and then you start, narrowing it down to all the little details, and you're in and out.
That can be cut in the composer. That's why it can be cut easily in the composer.
Yeah, so you can cut off anything. And it was just such a totally different process. So when I sat down and I started doing the outline, I realized that I had a lot more to say than I thought I would say. In fact, I started with the goal of doing 75,000 to 80,000 words, and I think I ended up around 110,000 words, which I thought was going to be too long. When we got to the final editing, it wasn't, the publisher and I, it wasn't as bad as much as I thought it was going to be.
Oh, but no, they did that. They did good editing, but as far as cutting, they wanted everything to stay in there. Exactly. There was nothing that they wanted out.
Right. Everything had to stay in there, and then we take it out as we need. And there was some redundancy. So that's really what helped me with the outline, because of the redundancy, because I found myself in a spiral. I would write a chapter, and then I'd put it aside, and then I'd write about something else. And I didn't have any focus about, do I write about this? Do I write about my family? And then do I write about going to school? Or do I continue the flow with the family on into school? It was really difficult until I sat down and I did this outline. And part of the process for me, this works for me, but maybe not everyone, was I set up a cloud file of every chapter in the outline. And so I thought of little nuggets that I wanted in each chapter. I put that information just as a note in the cloud on that particular file. So it might be chapter 17 that I thought about something in the middle of the night, and I would put it on a piece of paper, and the next day I would put those notes in the file, so that when I got around to writing chapter 17, I had all these little things that had piled up, and I was ready to really write by then. And then part of my process was I had to remember things. And you know how you said you got to dig deep, and you got to think about what your life has been, and what not just what you have done, but how you impacted the world, how other people affected your life. And so I had to do a lot of research.
Tell me, Wanda. I have to ask you a question here. When you started thinking about your life, just what you were saying, did things flow, or did you have to dig? Did you look at pictures to remind you of stuff? What did you do?
It's a lot. I had to look at everything, and I am not a pack rat. I'm far from a pack rat, but I did save everything that had to do with my life. I've saved every article, and all journalists do that anyway. Every article I ever wrote, every article that was ever written about me, every chapter of a book, and I've written lots of chapters in journalism books and journals, journalism industry journals. Everything was written about me or that I wrote. I also looked at pictures, and I used to fuss at my husband because he would take a picture every time I turned a corner. He was taking pictures of this and that every time we went somewhere. Back in the day when we had real big hokey cameras, and I used to always just frown and say, "Can you stop taking pictures?" But then when I went through those photo albums,
how grateful were you, huh?
Much things that I had forgotten. And I want to give you an example of how looking at something visual really helps with the writing. So I was writing in a chapter about, I said I worked at 7 papers. One of the papers I worked at was USA Today. And when I was at USA Today, we were invited to go to the White House. USA Today is based in the Washington area. We were invited to go to the White House for a party. And I was trying to write something about the experience of going to the White House because I met someone who became one of my best friends and still is one of my best friends. And she lives in Savannah. And so I was writing about this experience of meeting this woman, and I couldn't remember when we went to the White House. And I kept trying to think. I went through the internet, and when we went, it was, I can't remember the year now, it was in the early 90s. So the internet wasn't then what it is now. So there wasn't anything on the internet about this particular party during the Clinton administration.
Okay.
But I even contacted the American Society of Newspaper Editors because they keep records on things. And I couldn't find anybody there now because, the staff has changed. It would give me the time to go back and do the research. And I really trying to think. I even called my friend who couldn't remember. And then one day I was sitting at my desk writing something totally different chapter. And I was drinking a cup of tea or something. I got up to go to the kitchen to get a refill on my tea or my coffee. And I was walking through the living room, and there on the wall was a photograph of the Clintons, and Hillary and Bill Clinton, and my husband and me. But more importantly, under the photograph, I had framed the photograph and the invitation, which had the date on it. And so all I needed was the date. And so having little things like that.
All came together. It's amazing that one thing is just, one little piece, and it all comes together.
And I just wanted the date. And that's where I found the date right there on my wall. And I had been walking around this house probably for weeks trying to remember this date. And it was just, I must pass this wall 5 times a day, if not.
That's such a parable. That's such a story. Just, what we're looking for is right there. We go all around. Well, speaking of which, would you bring your book closer to the screen, because I want you to tell us about the photograph. You're talking about keeping photographs. Yeah. Look at this wonderful photograph. What's it from? What year?
This was 1972 or 73. I think it was 73.
She got a photograph from 1972. I mean, that's perfect for her book. Look at young Wanda. Oh boy, she was.
I was 22.
What was she thinking, Wanda?
I was 22 years old. So this photograph was taken in my first newsroom. I was a copy editor at the Providence Evening Bulletin in Providence, Rhode Island. So this Georgia girl had gone all the way from Savannah through Atlanta to go to college at Spelman College, and then on to Providence, Rhode Island. And at some point, someone at the newspaper staff took this picture of me. And I had not seen this picture, I know, in 30 or more years. It was stuck in a book. And the book I acquired in 1972. But anyway, as we moved, and I worked at I lived in 8 states for my whole career. So this book got moved from place to place. It's a big binder. It's the size of a newspaper. And it literally was bound copies of a newspaper that I edited, a program that I did at Columbia University. So I was looking through the newspapers, the Columbia University newspapers, for something else, and out dropped this photograph. And as soon as I saw it, I was about halfway through the writing process, and this photo dropped in my lap. And I said, oh my goodness, I think this is the cover of the book.
It's the
I
perfect.
sent it to you. I scanned it and sent it to you. Did I send it to you early on?
Yes, you sent it to me. And I was like in awe. I just could not believe it, because it was so the cover of the book. I mean, what else? And you're so blessed to have, number one, saved all that, which is a lesson for writers who might be listening, is that, you throw away nothing. In those movies where you see the writer out in the middle of the night burning all his or her, papers because it didn't get published or something. I cannot look at those scenes. I really can't. I think, oh, don't you burn anything? Everything is useful eventually. We just haven't gotten. I have a file, that just says, to be done, and all it is just snippets of things and ideas that I have that I know that are important, and sometimes they're beautifully written.
Yeah, and
I don't know where I'm going to put them.
Back in the day, we had photographs. I mean, real live paper copies of photographs. So I don't know what the young folks are going to do now that everything is digital. But one of the best things about this particular photograph, and many others that I have, is that I knew where it came from because the photographer stamped on the back of the photograph his name.
I haven't thought of that in years. Yeah.
The name of the photographer, and I think the name of the newspaper it might have been on. So every photographer in newsrooms back in the day when we did paper copies had a stamp, a personal stamp that belonged to him or her, and they would put it on the pad and stamp the back of the photograph so that those of us who are copy editors, and you and I have both been copy editors, when we write the caption, we would give credit to the photographer. That was the only way we could say by, John Doe, name of the
John Doe.
Yeah, I have this, and of course, in order to use the picture for the cover, I needed to get permission, and so I was able to then write the current editor of the paper, who was someone who was a lot younger than me and had never heard of Wanda Smalls, who worked at the paper in the early 1970s, and so I sent him a copy of the picture and the name and asked his permission. Of course, he immediately proudly gave me permission to use it, so I have the written permission. But those are just some things that helped me in the writing process by just looking at this picture. Not only did this become the cover, but it helped me kind of focus on what a copy editor's job is. So it's very difficult to see, but in this picture is a typewriter.
She's getting my copy.
Oh, you're getting your copy. There's a typewriter, I mean like an old-fashioned manual typewriter. I don't know if we can see it. You're moving it too fast, Tina. There is a copy pencil. And when I say pencil, I mean lead pencil. There is a gum eraser. The long sheets of paper, the pneumatic tubes. And so in the book, after looking at this picture, I was reminded to describe what a pneumatic tube is. Mm-hmm. And I set it up to say something about the pneumatic tube life cycle of a story, because the story goes in the tube, very much like when you go to the bank. Mm-hmm. You put your money, if you're
drive through,
you put your money in this little tube, and then it goes whoosh over the, and it lands somewhere, and they put your money in the tube or your deposit slip, and then it comes back your way. And then there are people sort of in the background. So having a photograph also helps in the writing process, because you can describe what was going on around you. And that's what I was able to do, to describe kind of a typical newsroom. I have to turn the book on the back, because on the back, there's a typewriter, if you get it. And my publisher, which is New South Books, put a typewriter, a more modern typewriter, it might have even been an electric typewriter, on the back cover. And when they sent me the cover, I said, I really like the idea, but can you put an old-fashioned typewriter? And they didn't know what I was talking about, old-fashioned typewriter. They thought that was old-fashioned. And so I said, well, no, like the one I still have on the shelf in my living room. And they were like, oh, you got a picture. Can you take a picture of it? And so this is actually my typewriter, the typewriter that I learned to type on. And another writing story. I grew up in a funeral home, and I learned to write obituaries at the kitchen table.
Which of course is a book in itself.
That's a whole nother book. So that's the typewriter that I learned to type obituaries on at the kitchen table. And I have a story about that in the book as well.
I didn't know that was the typewriter. I'll have to inspect the next time I see it. I'll have to look at it with more reverence. Right. Well, it's interesting. It's not an electric. That's not an electric typewriter in the back.
No. That's old-fashioned.
Oh yeah, that's right. That was the electric thing.
Where when you turn the carriage, you sling it back, and then you type a little more, and then you sling it back, and you type a little.
Well, that's interesting. They have app where you can have the sound of hitting keys, while you're hitting the keyboard. And when I read about that, I saw that they had it. I remember the feel of it wasn't just the sound. The non-electric typewriter had sort of a kick to it. You hit the keys and the thing went up on so it was a different kind of feel. It was a different kind of feel. So the expression, coming in and slamming out a story, or coming in and all those expressions were like hitting the keyboard. Very interesting.
Yeah. But even describing the sound of a typewriter is writing exercise. If I were teaching this in a classroom, I would put the typewriter in front of my students, and I would say, and I would maybe type something, although I don't think I can type on a real typewriter anymore, having to use a computer, and ask them to, describe it, write write a page about what you see, or maybe have them type on it. What do you feel? It's a real good way of teaching writing, to experience something that's not the norm, or to describe something that is either in a novel,
like the click of the have you frozen on me? Oh, there you go. The click, the sound of, when you said that, my assignment would be the sound of the click, clack of that's what I would probably describe, because it has a specific sound of its own. And we don't hear that sound anymore. I mean, it's just, nobody hears the sound of a typewriter.
It would be the same as describing the smell of food cooking, for example.
Absolutely.
Or the ocean, or anything like that.
Because you get the sight and sound, the smell of it. And smell. I don't know about you, but I am. I don't know what olfactory. I don't know what the word is, but smells bring back memories to me often. Cooking smells, or even out in the garden, dirt. The smell of rain hitting dirt is very evocative for me. So I think one of the things that we're talking about, Wanda, is what I said to you when I said stop writing like a journalist, because what we're talking about now is easing up and loosening up and giving yourself time to think about those signs. And let me ask you this: what kind of experience was it writing your memoir? I mean, if you could, not in one word, but was it enlightening? Was it sad? Was it sobering?
It was, so a lot of people say that writing is cathartic. And in some ways it was, because let me just describe, if I can, what the book is about.
Sure.
And that might help understand it a little bit. So this is the story of a girl who grew up in the Jim Crow South in a time in the 50s and 60s where by law we were told what we could do, where we could go, how we went to public schools, how we learned, how our teachers learned and taught us. That is, our teachers literally left the state to get their graduate degrees because they could not go to the University of Georgia because the law would not allow them to go to the University of Georgia. And the state paid money for them to go to great schools, Columbia and NYU and University of Pittsburgh, and just wonderful schools up north, as we call it then and now. So this girl grew up under the restrictive laws of Jim Crow. We had certain neighborhoods we were living in. We learned certain kinds of things in school. We learned I like to call it the classics, especially when we got to college, but we also read Black authors. We went downtown.
All your teachers were Black.
All my teachers were Black.
The students were Black. The teacher was Black.
And most in college, not all at Spelman, but most at Spelman College. We would go shopping, but sometimes in some stores we couldn't try on hats or shoes. In the store, I tend to think the Jewish store owners were a little more accommodating than some white store owners.
Every small town had a Jewish store of some kind, whether it was a department store or whether it was a small store. You're absolutely right, and those were the ones.
I read about going to Levy's department store, which was the biggest department store in Savannah, and they had this wonderful white tablecloth restaurant called the Azalea Room, and I always wanted to go into the Azalea Room because it smells so good. I found out later it smelled good because they had Black women in there cooking the food.
Of course, yeah.
That's a whole nother book too. About who cooks.
Well, I always used to say that at the Woolworths, when was segregated, when like you, we were born in the same year. I always said they had the lunch counter in the back for Black folks and lunch counter in front for white folks. Exactly. And like you said, that's why students got arrested, because they were breaking the law by sitting in white only places. But I always used to say, and I think the people who came to my father's juke joint used to say, "Oh, the food tastes better in the back." He said, "Because there's Black folks cooking in the back now. The ones in front, the waitresses would cook for food." So that's true. I know all the Black cooks, all the Black chefs at Woolworth baked all the cakes.
Okay.
I knew the lady who baked the cakes, So you're right. It did smell good in there because.
But it's good in Levy's because it was a fancy restaurant, So
like at Rich's in Atlanta. The tea room at Rich's.
White tablecloth. The waiters looked, really dressed up. Maybe even had on tuxedos. I don't remember. But my grandmother would always, number one, feed me before we left home, because she did not want me to be hungry when we went to the store for that reason. And I didn't know at the time why we always ate a big meal before we went shopping on Saturday afternoon. And also because she knew that we couldn't go in there. She didn't want to have to make a scene in the store by explaining.
I'm hungry. Yeah, Mama Kaka and I can't go in there. Huh?
And so this story, I think, is about three or four themes. One is history, the Jim Crow. Part of it. Another theme, of course, is journalism, because that was my career. And another theme is leadership, because I became a leader. And finally, one of the big themes, which kind of intersects with leadership, is diversity, because I became a diversity advocate for the newspaper business. And so all these themes are kind of woven into the whole book. And I learned so many lessons about diversity from my mother, who you met when we were at Spelman, because my mother was a senior buyer for the Army and Air Force Exchange Service, and she had some of her own diversity issues that she had to work through. She was the only African American buyer for a while. That eventually there were a couple more. And
probably the most fabulous one that they had. Her name is Gloria. I call her Glamorous Gloria. She was the first woman, like executive Black woman that I met, who traveled around the world and was responsible for buying all the toys for the PX. And she came in. She had her hair. She's a very beautiful, ruddy woman. When I say ruddy, everything was red. Her hair was red. She had on a suit with a fox collar. She came in. She had heels and beautiful stockings on. I'm telling you, she came in and just said, and I said, "Oh, there are women like that. I didn't just read about them, and they can be Black." It was a very important moment for me.
And I spent a lot of time writing about my mother, who didn't raise me. She left me in Savannah with my grandmother, and eventually my aunt and uncle finished raising me. But she had a lot to do with my development as a leader and as someone who was a diversity advocate, and quite frankly, as an editor, because I read about the fact that I would write her letters just about every week. And she would correct my letters and correct the spelling and correct whatever grammar errors there were. And she would put it in an envelope, and her next letter, she would send me the old letter back, and everything was marked in red. And I would have to rewrite the entire letter and send it back to her. And then if she found any errors on that letter or the letter I followed up with, she would send it back, and we just kept the cycle going. So it wasn't until we got to
learning. Of learning naturally, huh?
Yeah, so when we were at Spelman, we took our journalism classes at Clark College, now Clark Atlanta, across the street from Spelman. And Mr. Bustle used to mark up our papers, remember, in red. I don't know if it was pencil or ink. And I looked at it, I was like, oh, I've already done this. My mother did this to me for years.
This is nothing. Oh, we're doing more of this. You know, I can teach this class, right? Yeah. Oh my goodness.
I credit her a little bit with, helping me to define my career. I really decided on my career in high school when I was taking a journalism class, and in 12th grade I became editor of the newspaper at my high school in Savannah. And so that's how I knew when I got to Spelman that I really wanted a career in journalism. And so this book really takes you all the way through my career and up to the point where I come back to Savannah and go to work at Savannah State University as chair of the department. And I read a little bit about it, but I really don't go into depth. I really wanted to end it right there because that's really the coming full circle in the title.
Well, I have to ask two questions for you. The first is the one we always ask writers when they're talking about their current book. Well, what are you working on now, Wanda? Is there anything coming up? But the other thing is, do you feel like you have more than even another book in you? How do you feel now that you have published your memoir about what you have to offer as an author?
Well, when I finished Coming Full Circle, even before we went through the publishing phase, but just finished the writing and sent the manuscript off to the publisher, it was almost like I felt when I had my baby. I was like, I'm not doing this again. I'm done.
Yeah, don't ask you that right after you've had birth, right? Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
But so I really thought that would be the end, and I didn't have another book in mind. After the book was published, and I don't know that you and I have had this conversation yet, Tina, but my daughter, who's now almost 38 years old, some of her friends were encouraging me. They were so they so appreciated the fact that I became a successful career woman and I was able to maintain a family and raise a child who is well-adjusted and thriving quite well in her own career. And a lot of the young women today are saying to her and others, she doesn't have children yet, but some of her friends who do have children are saying, how did she do that? How did she become the top editor at USA Today? How did she become the executive editor in Montgomery, Alabama, and have a family and raise a child, a well-adjusted child, and maintain a marriage, which is now 45 years, 44, I can't remember, 45 years. So
let's take a moment, folks. Let's just take a moment. Absolutely, yeah. That's no joke. 45, 44 years in, it's it's no joke. You have a great husband. Yeah. You picked well. He did too. Yeah.
So we were really thinking about how do I write something that would address some of the questions that some of the young women have. And I was really starting to put an outline together. And then one day you called me and you said, this was right around the time right after the death of George Floyd. Mm-hmm. And we were into COVID because I started my book was published in February of this year, 2020. Right. And I started a national book tour, which was going to go through the year at least. I was going to go along for some of the fun occasions. We were going to come on some of the trips, and we already had a few of them already scheduled for you to be there. And so we the tour was canceled or put on, like everybody else's tour, else's. And we had to think about, well, how do we continue to, get the word out about the book? And then on top of worrying about COVID and thinking about how we're going to exist in this new world, George Floyd's death really devastated so many people in not just the country, but the world based on all the protests. And so we were watching TV like everybody else every day, every night, all the protests and just the details. And you called me one day, you said, "Hey, how are you doing?" I said, "Tina, I'm not well. I'm depressed. I'm sad. I don't quite know. I can't sleep. I watch TV all night because I'm afraid I'm going to miss something. I'm angry with the police."
And we're news junkies to begin with. So of course we're ingesting this all the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so you and I talked about, well, how do we feel about this situation? And then I said, I've been getting phone calls from some of my white friends who are saying, we empathize with what's going on. We feel bad about it. We didn't know that things were as bad, that racism was as bad as it seems now that all this is coming out. And you and I are going, well, duh, we've been telling you all this for years, that no matter who you are, no matter what.
16, 19, yeah.
Yeah, that we all are the butt of, we all face racism. I certainly faced it in my career. There's some of the stories in my book about it. And we said, well, what can we do? Because my white friends are saying, well, what can we do? How do we, we're too old. We're not going to get out there and protest, especially in this age of COVID. But even without COVID, we're just not the ones that get out there and march all day. What can we do? How can we learn about Black culture and understand what's going on, learn more about history, and then how can we help? And that's the beginning of this conversation that you and I had. So I'm going to let you answer the question about what's the next book.
What's the next book? Well, we were having this conversation, and one of the things that you may have guessed is that Wanda and I have very productive conversations. I mean, we talk about how you doing and everything, but somehow they're really productive, whether for our home or for our, house, or moving ahead with your business, or what you want to write. And so we were talking about this, and I said, duh, I have a publishing company. It just sort of hit me. I have a publishing company, a small press that I founded in 2007. And it's called Down South Press.
In Montgomery, by the way, where I was editor of the paper. You announced it in Montgomery in 2007, your publishing company.
I sure did, at
the Rosa Parks Museum.
It's the Rosa Parks Museum, and I have a signing there. Gosh, you do so much, and life is so busy you forget. It's wonderful to be able to put things like together. I sure did. Thank you so much for that. Wanda, you did too. You made sure that I had the place at the Rosa Parks Museum, and that I could launch my publishing company, which published my 5th novel, Taking After Muddy. So I was thinking, gosh, it had sort of been not lying dormant, but I had not been writing. Life had gotten in the way, and I hadn't been publishing. And when it came to me, I said, we have a publisher right here. I said, you know what we do. We write. We know what we can do. We teach. We know what we can do. We can tell stories. And we can think critically. That's one of the things that being a journalist really did teach you. And I said, we should do some essays. And I don't even know who said it. Once you start talking, well, let's do African-American women. Okay, just only African-American women? Yeah, that's okay. Because we had that discussion. Should it be African-American women and, all women, just open to all women? And we said, no, we really want to hear African-American women's voices right now. And so we talked about it. And as soon as we really said it, it was just off and going. It really was. Wanda is not only my can-do girlfriend, she's also my fire starter. She will light a fire under me in a minute. I wake up thinking I'm going to be in the garden all day, and it's going to be a nice day. I make lemonade, And I talk to Wanda, the next thing I know, I'm on my computer doing stuff, and all the phone working with deadlines. So we decided to publish a book. We're co-editing a book of essays, a collection of essays, and the title is Meeting at the Table, African-American Women Write on Race, Culture, and Community. And all 3 of those were important to us. You want to sort of take it over, Wanda?
First of all, race. I'm a proponent of conversations about race. That's part of my advocacy as a media professional. I developed training programs, and I went around the country helping newspapers and readers understand how to have conversations about race. I really think that's necessary. So race was important just because we were in this era of anti-racism is the best way to describe it. And
Not
then
a moment, but a movement of it.
it's a movement.
Not just a moment, but a movement. That's why we knew that the book was important for.
And we talked about the fact that we don't even know what this movement is going to be called, you know, when history is told. I don't know that the civil rights movement was called the civil rights movement in the 60s, in the early 60s. I don't remember because I was, you know, we were very young in our early teens, so I don't remember that. But that's important. Then there's culture, because the conversations that I was having with some of my white friends, and they were having with some of their white friends, and they told me this, was that we realize now that we don't understand what your culture is. We don't know enough about your culture. And so we're asking our writers to write about race and culture. And then I think you later said we really are talking about community, because when we have these conversations and when we learn the culture, this is really about building the community, changing the community, but building the community. And so that's where those three things.
Well, you know, interestingly enough, I had a conversation with a publisher friend of mine, another publisher friend, and it was a man, and I was telling him about the title and, you know, sort of running things, you know, by him to, you know, pick his mind, because he's very smart. And he said, well, sis, he calls me sis. Well, sis, he said, what I'm thinking about is, you know, women and writing and what African-American women have done and what they, you know, do. And he just sort of took me through this. He kept thinking, he says, you know, love, I think love when I think about African-American. He just took me through it and, you know, brought me right to community. At first, actually, we had love as the last one. And then we talked about it and, you know, and realized that it was community. So one of the things Wanda really brought to me, and I'd had that same experience, is about so many, you know, white women especially asking. But one of the things that I was also very interested in and insisted on is that these are essays that are written from the hearts of Black women, from their experiences, which are very, quite varied, but that they were speaking, and that anyone who wanted to really hear and listen and know the soul of our community, the soul of our culture, and the soul of our women especially, you know, could learn something from it. So I see it as, you know, it's a dual thing, you know, where my vision is that these are essays that speak from women's hearts, and some of them famous and some of them, you know, not as well known, but also that in answering these questions and in speaking from the heart, you know, that women of, you know, non-white women and non-Black women, I'm sorry, could really get something from it. I mean, I just think that the book and what we're writing about comes from such a deep and rich place. Like you said, you know, we don't know your culture. So, I mean, I think that it's going to enlighten a number of people. And quite frankly, I found out things about
us about some things as well. We will learn some things from some of the writers who are working with us. I think we have gone past the 45 minutes that I had planned. You know, when we get on Zoom now, we get on Zoom several times a week, and sometimes we look up, it's 2.5, 3 hours, and so we can talk on and on. But I wanted people to know the timetable will be out this year with meeting at the table, and that I wanted you to know that. I want to thank, in closing, the Charleston Public Library for inviting us to have this conversation, and we're hopeful that those of you who are watching it will enjoy it, and it'll sort of whet your appetite for perhaps doing some of your own writing and understanding the process of writing. We talked a little bit at the beginning before we started recording about, well, what are we going to talk about? We're just going to talk about your book. And we decided we really wanted to focus on the process of writing. So that's largely been what we've discussed today. But also thank you, Tina, for being.
Before we go, can we tell a couple of the names that we have already who are going to be writing, women who are going to be writing for our meeting at the table, which, as Wanda said, we're aiming to get it out before the end of the year, which is a very tight schedule. And we know that, and our contributors know that. So, you know, keep us in mind. We also have a GoFundMe page, so you can help us that way. But one of the things that, Wanda, did I forget my thought? Help me.
Well, you're going to name a couple of people who are writing.
Say it again.
You're going to name a couple of people who are writing.
Thank you.
Mhm.
See,
We do that all the time because between us, you know, we can't remember everything.
it's kind of like having a husband. She's like my work husband. She finishes my sentence and she knows what I'm going to say. But we're very proud that we have essays coming in already from the mayor of Atlanta, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. We have Imani Perry. Many of you may know her from her wonderful book Breathe, her bio of Lorraine Hansberry, who wrote A Raisin in the Sun. We also have, we got a couple of your names.
Sure. There's a woman that a lot of you may not know. Her name is Sheila Brooks, and she's the CEO of SRB Communications. She is an African-American woman with a multi-million-dollar office on L Street in Washington, D.C. She is a bad sister, and she has
I didn't even know her.
Amazing story to write. So we're going to end it here because I think we've gone over our time. But again, thank you, Tina, not only for joining me in this discussion, but also writing the foreword to Coming Full Circle. And we hope all of you have enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
It was my joy. It's my joy to write the foreword. It's my joy to talk to you.
Thanks
for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, sweetie.